Hi, everybody. I meant to start this off by saying we're going to be very strict on time, and then I realized that we're 2 minutes over already, so that's all on me. You'll notice from the format that we have of the tables, that kind of gives a sense of the way that we'd like today to run, that we're all peers here. You know, we have experts in the room, no doubt, but I think we all have something to add to the conversation. So we're going to have, hey, Jacob, we're going to have the following workshops, and then within them there'll be a table exercise, there'll be Q&A, there'll be a little bit of expert feedback. But during it, if there's something burning, I think the way we'd like to do it is that you can put your hand up. One thing I would say though is that we're also live streaming this, so if you don't have a microphone, nobody will be able to hear you on the recording, which you may prefer if it's profane, but just forgive me if I run over to you with the microphone. On that basis. So what we're going to do is we're going to have the workshop 1, exploring the overlaps. Then we'll have a break. That's a little bit of a kind of rest break. I note the toilets are over there, the exits there and there, and the Wi-Fi is the AIB guest. So that'll be free to join, there's no password. Then we'll have workshop 2, then we'll take a break. As you probably already know, but I think it's worth reminding people that the training in the afternoon is a paid training. So everybody's welcome to stay for lunch at the end of these 2 workshops. But if you haven't paid for the training, we'd invite you to leave, or you can talk to Grania and maybe you've been excited so much by the first 2 workshops that you want to stay. That is possible. And then we have the CDP training, and CDP will be managing that. So my name is Mark. I work on climate strategy and decarbonisation within Goodbody Clearstream. And Goodbody Clearstream essentially administrates the CDP network, as many of you will know because you'll have been to events before. So what I want to talk to as well is just the way that we're going to do the workshops. So we'll have 10 minutes contribution from Anvita, who's joining us here. Anvita is an analyst with CDP. You can hear us, Anvita? Yes, very good. And then we'll have about 10 minutes from Fionn, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. I'll start. I have 3 questions I'm dying to ask them, and then we'll open it up to everybody. So that'll be a 20-minute kind of Q&A with the panel, and then we'll do a quick table exercise where we just ask you kind of to get the networking bit going, that you guys can work together on the table. So without any further ado, I'll ask Anvita to take it away.
Thanks so much, Mark, and I hope everyone can hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for joining this session on CSRD and CDP overlaps. So first, I'll be taking us through CDP's work so far with respect to the standards and frameworks landscape globally, and specifically in the context of the CSRD and the ESRS. So I'm assuming there is a good deal of familiarity with the whole backdrop of the EU Green Deal and the key pieces of regulation that came out of it. That is the EU taxonomy, CSRD, and SFDR. So I won't go into too much detail on that. But the focus for our session is to look particularly at the ESRS requirements to be reported under the CSRD, and what CDP's role is in enhancing the preparedness of companies to meet all of these different standards requirements. So first here, we look at how CDP is enabling alignment with standards in the global landscape. So on the left here, you see that we're already aligned with TCFD since 2018, and also subsequently the EU taxonomy regulation, and then the IFRS S2 requirements since 2024, and the greenhouse gas protocol. On the right, you will see what we are currently actively working towards to expand alignment with, and that is the ESRS, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, the TNFD, and the US SEC rule. So looking in more detail at what our alignment with ESRS currently looks like. The next slide, please. So we've already taken the first steps towards being aligned with ESRS. We've announced a partnership with EFRAG, which is the advisory body that's responsible for developing the standards, to initiate the work on alignment. And the goal of this partnership is essentially to accelerate the implementation of ESRS crucially through capacity building. And so far, we've found that because CDP and ESRS, the climate requirements are aligned with TCFD and the IFRS S2 requirements. For companies that have been reporting to CDP so far, their preparedness to meeting the IFRS as well as the ESRS climate requirements looks pretty good already. A little bit more in detail on the next slide. You will look at the illustration here, which shows you the overlap with ESRS2 and E1, which I think the next session will cover in more depth. So what we're working towards currently is to increase our alignment between the non-climate standards, so E2 through E5, and to basically understand where the gaps lie and how we can further simplify and reduce the burden in reporting across all the standards. Next slide. So some key takeaways here on our standards alignment work, three in particular that I'll discuss are firstly, one that relates to enhancing interoperability and harmonization. So in a fragmented standards landscape, CDPs trying to achieve harmonization across these different standards by incorporating them and aligning with them in one questionnaire, one single questionnaire. So towards harmonization efforts, the idea is to produce actionable data and then to feed this data back to stakeholders and the market in one single data set. So that's the goal. The second takeaway is about supporting companies on their pathway to preparedness. So what CDP is doing through this work on alignment is to translate very complex standards into actual disclosure questions and data points that are simple and with a huge amount of guidance for companies to report. So for example, the 2024 questionnaire already caters to aligning with the IFRS S2 requirements. And we plan on increasing the alignment with ESRS in the coming years. The third key takeaway relates to going beyond the baseline. So CDP will continue to evolve its disclosure platform to align with best practice disclosure standards and methodologies. And here it seeks to go beyond the global baseline of requirements, that is the IFRS, and to kind of push market uptake of high ambition, robust environmental disclosures. Next slide. So having looked at our current status of alignment with ESRS and a little bit on what our work on alignment is going to achieve in the coming years, I'll take us very briefly through what the key changes on alignment look currently for the 2024 questionnaire. So how have they influenced the questionnaire? Again, the points that I'd like to emphasize are here in four major points, basically. So the first one relates to the questionnaire now has specific questions that go beyond risk assessment. So until 2023, the focus was on risks and opportunities assessment, from a financial materiality aspect. But in 2024, we were introduced impact and dependencies assessment as well. So that is a sort of a double materiality step towards aligning with double materiality. These questions you will find in module 2, for example. Then we have new questions that have been introduced also on priority location, for example. So here we've sort of started focusing in line with TNFD requirements, asking companies to report on priority locations so that the focus can be on high impact sort of location driven analysis. The third area where standards alignment has impacted the questionnaire is value chain mapping. And this you'll find in module 5, where we ask companies to look at how they've classified and prioritized their supply chain engagement, what environmental requirements are part of their purchasing process, and how the supply chain seeks to comply, hopes to comply with these environmental requirements. So connected to this is a change that supply chain questions are now asked across different modules of the questionnaire. So these are some key areas where standards alignment have already started to impact the questionnaire, and you'll see more of these changes in the coming years. Next slide. So as we're talking about enhancing preparedness of companies to compliance, let's look at here what are some of the challenges that companies will face as they prepare themselves for compliance. So so firstly, we look at four types of challenges we've identified. So firstly, it's the issue of lack of homogeneous application. So basically, even though the EU regulations seek to bring about comparability of data through these different pieces of legislation, there's still a lot of room for individual applications of those standards across different sectors in the industry. So, for an example of this is that there's no consistent definition of key concepts across the EU policy framework. For example, transition plans in the ESRS are differently defined from prudential transition plans in the CSRD. Same goes with key concepts used in the SFDR, for example. Other examples also include that there's an inconsistent application of materiality assessment, the methodology for materiality assessment. There are some methodologies for impact indicators are not yet available for assessment, for example, in areas like biodiversity. So this is a key hurdle that companies may face in the financial side of it, where inconsistent data will come out of the reporting for the first few years. The second hurdle is that there can be varying interpretations. So these regulations are very complex, and it will take some time for the market to digest these regulations and build up internal capacities to implement them, implement changes in strategy and governance and so on. And for the market to converge on a common understanding of these regulatory texts. We've seen this already in the context of SFDR disclosures, and also a little bit in the context of the EU taxonomy. So the third issue relates to international operability and interoperability related problems. So a lot of the EU regulations refer to very EU specific norms and labels. You'll see this in pollution, for example, and other specific, like the directive for priority substances, things like that.
And Vita, I know you're on the last slide, but we might move it along, and we can cover some of these things in the discussion as well. But yeah, perhaps if there was just another point maybe on the access to data, and then we'll move over to Fionn. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Yes, so so just to wrap up the point on hurdles, the access to data is basically that the success of these regulations, the achievement of their objectives, hinges on the consistency of data that is disclosed on various aspects. But smaller stakeholders like SMEs, for instance, and international actors, non-EU actors, may not be able to access this data across their value chain. That is also a big hurdle that is relevant in this context. So here on the slide, you will also see some key solutions, which is for all of these different hurdles, that is to provide more implementation guidance, to build capacity building and engagement, and for standard setters to provide equivalences to enable disclosure tagging, platform tagging, etc., standards tagging, and to scale up the adoption of these disclosure standards. And for some of these solutions, CDP has already started working towards incorporating various features of its disclosure platform to address these challenges, which some of which Fionn will address in his segment. So now I hand over to him to take you through overlaps between CDP and CSRD. Thank you, and sorry for going over time a little bit.
Not at all, Anvita. Thank you.
Thanks, Anvita. Everyone can hear me okay? I've never used one of these things before, so it's very like Boyzone-esque, so I have to get used to it. Thanks so much for that presentation, Anvita. As you said, so I'm going to discuss the overlaps between your CDP questionnaire and your CSRD disclosures. And I think a good way to look at it is through the viewpoint of what can CDP do for you and how can it contribute to your CSRD work and what's that going to undertake. So you can see from this slide that this is the 1 to 9 new modules. If you're currently working on your CDP questionnaire, don't recoil in fear or throw rotten fruit at me. I understand it's there's been a lot of changes and there has been some teething issues, but pressure makes diamonds. So look at it that way. But I think it's a good context setting in the sense that, just to give us a good brief overview before we get into the detail, module 1 is your introduction. 2 and 3 is your double materiality, that those dependencies, impacts, risks and opportunities. 4 and 5, your governance and business strategy. 6 is your consolidation approach, and 7, 8 and 9 pertain to climate change, forestry and water security. So we've consolidated modules 2, 3 and 5 here, and on the left there is disclosure points, and then on the right you can see we've graded it in is there overlap, is there alignment, partial alignment or full alignment between the CDP questionnaire and the CSRD. So if we're going to take the first 4 points here, that is really your double materiality. So it's your business model mapping, your upstream, own operations, downstream. There's the process of identifying the DIROs, dependencies, impacts, risks and opportunities. And really what the commonality there is your scope, time horizons, and what tools you're using. Secondly, there's the details, substantive and material DIROs, and also the financial quantification of risks and opportunities. So you can see that there is many overlaps between these 4. However, the main difference here is in this year's iteration of the CDP questionnaire, they're not asking for specific details of those dependencies and impacts, but I think this shows the ambition of CDP to align with the ESRS and the CSRD and what they're going to want in the future. So expect those details to come in the next few years. You can see that there is in the CSRD point for financial quantification of risks and opportunities is amber. So that really tells us that CDP are asking for financial quantification of risks and opportunities now, while the CSRD has a 3-year phase-in mechanism where, like that, you do not have to disclose any financial metrics as of now, but will do in the next 3 years. Another interest point in this slide is that of climate transition planning. So we're going to get into that in more detail in the next workshop, but CDP are putting more onus on the climate transition plans now, as is really coming from everywhere. And they have a framework set out and key performance indicators of which you can meet. And CSRD, there is also an onus on climate transition plans. However, it's important to note that they are not mandatory as of yet. However, EFRAG are working on guidance to kind of delve into the detail of what they expect of a climate transition plan more. I'm not quite sure when it's to be published, later this year or early next year. But again, expect that ambition to grow and for that to eventually become mandatory. Another interesting point in this is the overlap between the EU taxonomy, as CDP are looking for those details, which is really a classification of what is your sustainable economic activities in a company, and it's also a foundation and a core part of the CSRD. Module 4, governance. So you can see there is quite a bit of overlap here between what is the board management oversight of sustainability and environmental matters. what is the board management competence in dealing with these matters, and a very important piece of environmentally linked incentive schemes. Where CDP is lacking is they don't go as far as the CSRD as looking for the metrics of corruption and bribery incidents, and also details of supplier payment practices, namely, do you pay your SMEs on time, essentially. Module 6, so you would think that this module does a lot of heavy lifting for that ESRS E1 standard climate change, and you'd be correct. It does do a lot of contribution to it. So if you kind of think about the standards in broken down into 4 points of metrics, targets, actions, and policies. In the policy sense, CDP this year are asking for your broad environmental policies. So where you can detail your climate policy, biodiversity, water, and everything else you might have. Metrics, so carbon footprint, and within that your energy mix, targets, your emissions targets, your near-term, long-term, the science-based targets, and then the actions of decarbonisation initiatives. So there's overlaps between all of those. Of course, climate-related risks and opportunities is a very important part of both CDP and CSRD. But again, where that is lacking at the moment is the CDP aren't looking for those meaty details of your dependencies and impacts, just your risks and opportunities. Forestry. So to look at this, you would think forestry, this module is going to give a massive contribution to that E4 biodiversity standard. And if you look at it again through the lens of the metrics, targets, and actions, the metrics of timber and soil volume, managed use land, is there a traceability system in place, and targets of no deforestation or conversion targets, and then actions of land use policies, etc. And this will contribute quite a bit, but it's important to remember that forestry is but a facet of that biodiversity and ecosystem standard. It's much more broad than that and can encompass much more, but it can contribute to that facet of forestry specifically. Water. So this module does contribute quite a bit to that E3 water standard. Again, withdrawal, discharge, and consumption metrics, your water-related targets, and in the action sense, water treatment methods. An important thing to remember here is details of water pollutants. This would actually contribute to the pollution standard rather than E3, the water one. And you can note from the bottom here where CDP is lacking is, and again, as you can see, with their ambition grows with their integration of double materiality, that I will be confident that this will eventually match up. But CSRD are looking for more mature metrics and things like details of water stress, specific location-based data, and details of water baseline. Now, this graphic is really just to illustrate an approximation of, imagine you're in a scenario, you've score a CDP questionnaire and you're thinking, what can that do for me in my CSRD journey? And this is just a broad generalization of how it may contribute. So you can see, and the colors in the boxes are attempting to illustrate that. And you can see the real heavy hitters in this are in your ESRS 2, that's contributed from your double materiality. It's contributed from some aspects of the strategy module. Of course, climate change from that climate change module, water, and then business conduct from your governance and business strategy modules can contribute heavy. Most notably, there's no social aspect to the CDP, so that's where there's really no contribution there. Now, I'm going to hand it back over to Mark, and he's going to fire questions at us.
That's awesome. Ready?
Great. Yeah, ready.
Okay, well, my first one is for Shay, and thanks for that, Fionn. The first one with Shay is, obviously we have CSRD, super trendy right now, and then we have CDP was there before, so it gets credit for being there before. But obviously, as both of these evolve, kind of moving forward, what's the relationship between them, and I suppose what are the differentiators between them as well?
Thanks, Mark. I know lots of people in the room. For those who don't know me, I lead the responsible business and reporting team at Clearstream and are helping a lot of clients on their CSRD journey at the moment. for any of you who have looked at the standards already, you definitely can't be an expert on everything. So I'm definitely here to represent the CSRD side rather than the CDP side today. A good question, Mark. I suppose it's a question and it's a debate we have internally a lot. There's one side of, I suppose, of the table that see these voluntary standards and these type of platforms that score your performance as they'll always be around, and we'll always need them. The leaders, the people that want to differentiate themselves, will always want the likes of CDP. I think the level of ambition is so high within CSRD that when companies are up and running and you're creating your sustainability statements and we have the tagging in place, I believe that it will be up to the likes of CDP to pivot a little bit and to actually pull that information themselves from your sustainability statements, so you wouldn't have to report twice. They should be able to nearly score you based on the information you're providing. As Fionn showed there, that there's nothing really within the standards, the ESRS standards, that like the level of ambition there is so high that it encompasses everything that's within CDP.
So it would be fair to characterize that maybe almost like CDP becomes a lens that you can scan over CSRD and pull out what's important.
Yeah, like I'd see CDP as the scoring system. I think like when we go into clients, they're like, well, why should we do this? And we're like, you're going to be compared to your peers. And it's not like there'll be companies out there, third-party rating agencies, that will be just doing that because the tagging system is available. And I would just see CDP as one of those, and CDP will still be able to score companies because obviously CSRD and the regulation won't do that. But I think that's where they'll be important.
The scoring is different. Now, I'm very conscious that CDP is in the room and is well able to answer for themselves, but in the purposes of just moving
That's just
forward,
my opinion. Absolutely.
In the open session,
my crystal ball.
Yes, exactly. And Vita, we didn't get to have a chat about exactly what question you would like, so I've gone for a little bit of a difficult one. I hope you'll forgive me. But what I noticed in your slide deck, you were talking about CDP and the level of ambition that CDP has, and I wondered, there's always that kind of position with these things, is like, how far do you push the ambition before it's too far and people push back at you? And I wonder, how do you think CDP have hit it now? Are people pushing back against that ambition, or do you find leading companies actually saying, we'd like to have more?
Thanks, Mark. I think that's a very important question, to strike a balance between the ability to the capacity and ability of companies to report on very specific kind of metrics and indicators, and high ambition ones, and pushing the ambition in that direction. CDP's goal is definitely has been so far and will continue to be, to kind of raise the bar for disclosure in climate and environmental metrics, and kind of set the gold standard for that. Our work on standards alignment with IFRS and ESRS and TNFD, the goal with harmonizing is to kind of look through all of these different standards and distill the ones that actually provide value to investors to actually make the kind of sustainable finance decisions. So the work that we're doing is a step in that direction, and it will be an incremental process. So the goal is to take companies on that on the pathway to achieving that ambition. I'm sure the segment on transition plans will also touch on this aspect of it. So yeah.
That's super. Thanks, Anvish, for that. I think something I've always responded to with CDP is this idea that, you make a start, you're on the train, and you just make sure that your curve is going upwards rather than scaring people off early with the ambition. So it's striking that balance, I suppose.
Sorry, Mark, just to add to that, I just say, obviously CDP is global, whereas the ESRS are only EU. So I still see CDP being very relevant at the global scale and bringing everyone on the journey.
Yeah, and I think there was a survey of sustainability professionals globally, actually, and like 81% of people who are not in the EU are also intending to align to CSRD, because it's seen as, I think, a little bit like GDPR. It's one of kind of getting there first and being very comprehensive, and so a good organizing principle for companies. Don't worry, Fionn, I haven't left you out. So Fionn, can you maybe talk to the overlap between CDP, CSRD on the EU taxonomy?
Yeah, happily. I think a good place to start is, I suppose, what is the EU taxonomy? It's essentially a classification system of, as I said earlier, sustainable activities that your company may be involved in. And that's the real purpose of objective of that is for investors to see if you could meet that certain criteria. And so to, rather than getting bogged down in the detail of it, so right now it affects public companies. Next year it's will affect larger companies, or that large company metric that's within the CSRD. And really the process of it is to, and a very generalized whistle-stop tour of it is, step one, identify what eligible activities that you may have in a list provided by the EU Commission, namely EFRAG, and then it goes through a rigorous kind of screening process of, does it substantially contribute to 7 environmental standards? Does it not cause any harm to those standards? And then does it also meet a certain amount of minimum safeguards? And if it is the case that those activities pass through those, then they could be classified as taxonomy aligned. The final output of that is the disclosure of the percentage or numeric value of what is the value of those taxonomy aligned activities. So, and that is classified in your CapEx, OpEx, and turnover. And I find it, and it's just, I think it's just a sign of the ambition of CDP, as we're alluding to, as Anvita was answering there, to really, for us all to pull in the same direction, because in the, I think it's question 5.4, don't judge me on that, but it's, they are requesting for a generic is how much of your revenue in those 3 metrics of CapEx, OpEx, and turnover are sustainable activities, and gives you the option of the EU taxonomy or other frameworks. And I think that's just really, again, they're dipping their toe in that ESRS world, as it's the same, and it shows the same with the double materiality aspect, that as the years go on and the iterations mature, that we'll all be pulling in the same direction in what we're looking for.
Very good. Thank you, Fionn. Perhaps I might open it up to the room. Yours first. Thank you. Maybe just introduce yourself, because, you know, the networking piece.
Hello, my name is Christopher Cosmos. I work for Dole, and English is not my mother tongue, so if you don't want to understand what I'm saying, just shout out. I have a question for CDP, or if anyone in the room knows if the same kind of mapping, overlap mapping, has been done between CDP and, for example, SEC and ISSB and all the other American, so to speak, or others in the world reporting legislation coming up.
Great. Should I pick on you, Nicole, or Anvita? Okay, great. Anvita?
Yeah, sure, I can take this question. So yeah, we are currently, as part of our standards alignment work, mapping the CDP questionnaire to all of the existing standards. So the US SEC, the IFRS S2, we're also initiating an IFRS S1 mapping, and then the mapping to the ESRS standards as well as TNFD. So it's very comprehensive exercise.
Excellent. Thanks, Anvita. That's question. Great. Next question. Chairperson. This will be a very good question.
Sorry, Deborah Megan, the NTMA. Just a question again, just the practicalities with all the different standards. And it comes down to the devil is in the detail in exactly the questions that are asked and the data that is required, because what can be asked in one framework or one questionnaire can have a slightly different tilt in a separate questionnaire, and it's trying to align that data. So it's, for example, if you're asking for your total emissions or your carbon saved or your weighted average carbon intensity, how are the different standards aligning to ensure that the data asked is the same data? Because I think that probably is a huge lift for a lot of people trying to interpret the actual data requirements. So that's my question.
I knew it would be a good one. Who's brave enough to answer? Anvita?
I can.
You can have connectivity issues if you want, because I know that Nicole is in the room.
Well, I can address this from, it's definitely a concern that we are addressing in the context of our mapping exercise. So I can speak to it from a CDP lens. And currently there are, as you know, different standard setters have released their interoperability mappings. So ISSB has a document where it's very painstakingly mapped out each of its requirements against ESRS, highlighted areas where there's no correspondence, and also provided guidance as to how a company starting from ESRS would have to, what steps it would have to take to also align with IFRS, and similarly the other way around. And then, of course, there's the TNFD to ESRS in correspondence mapping, where there is a separate mapping for disclosure metrics between TNFD and ESRS, and again, where the discrepancies lie and what step companies should take to kind of align with both. So these are, to begin with, important guidance documents that companies should be referring to when they're selecting their metrics. It's indeed a inconvenience for different standards asking slight variations of the same kind of indicators, but this is something that standard setters seem to be aware of and providing guidance on how to navigate. In CDP's context, we are also attempting to come up with a way to kind of map these out, find out where the discrepancies and gaps lie, and to assess which one reflects best practice. So we're still kind of in the course of doing that exercise. So my guess is also that at least in the EU context, metrics will constantly keep evolving. But there will be feedback and there will be amendments to legislation. So hopefully we will move in a direction where there is consistency across these different variations or discrepancies. And hopefully the XBRL feature will also help achieve kind of consistency, congruence across these variations, if that's helpful.
That's super. Thanks, Anvita.
Mark, I might just add to that. Like, I think it's a huge challenge for companies. Like, what we see is that you've got maybe a CSRD team, and that could be the finance team, or it might be someone who's a bit who hasn't been as close to CDP working on CSRD. So they're working on their own metrics, and then you have the CSRD. The CDP, sorry, over on another team, and they're doing their work. So I think there's a bit of a way and a journey to go in terms of bringing it together. Just the right people, the right that your systems are set up that way to flag whether it's a ESRS metric or whether it's a CDP metric. But it's a real big challenge, like even for, I think, the consultants themselves. Often it's not that the CDP person isn't the CSRD person. Sorry, I'm getting confused between the acronyms here. So yeah, but I think over the next year or two, and as more companies do start to report, it'll all become a bit more streamlined.
Okay.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think this point also speaks to my point on the hurdles about internal capacity building. So the guidance provided by standard setters should hopefully also bring about internal, more interlinkages between the departments that do these different pieces of reporting. So that's, definitely agree with that. Yeah.
Super. Thank you. Thanks, Shay. Do you have any other questions? Michelle?
Hi, I guess this is a question for Avita. Do you see a day when the CDP platform might be used by companies to report on CSRD?
This is definitely a tricky question and a tricky area, and I think my colleagues from CDP will also maybe address this. Given that the goal is to, at the moment, is to enable preparedness and not to sort of, CDP has never typically been a compliance platform. So currently the strategy is kind of to enable companies on their journey to compliance with this directive, but as our work internally progresses, there might be different ways we come up with to reduce the gap between CDP reporting and the compliance angle of it. But in the immediate and short term, I think a solid partnership with other ASPs and consultancies would hopefully bridge this gap. Yeah.
Thank you.
Just to add to that as well, I think for the listed companies, it's very clear where this information should be reported, as in it should be in your annual report. For the private companies, it's a little bit less clear. Like, will you just produce a sustainability statement in a Word document that's very much just answering the questions like you would do for CDP? Or is this we want all the private companies to produce a sustainability statement that looks like the sustainability reports that we're used to? That's not really ironed out yet. Like, if you had some type of disclosure platform like CDP for CSRD, I think it would be much easier for companies, but that's not yet clear.
Yeah, definitely agree. I think this is still very much work in progress. This is the first year of CSRD application. So I think there will be more developments with CDP's platform, as well as with the collaboration that we have with EFRAG. Hopefully, the hope is that something like that comes about. So yeah.
Very good. We've time for one last burning question, or we'll move into our table exercise. Oh, Neil. Super.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, everyone. Neil Menzies from Hibernia Real Estate Group. Again, sorry, I need another question for CDP, but Mark is talking about this curve, that we're all on a journey on a curve. I see it being quite steep this year. You know, for a lot of companies, the jump to DI, like, dependencies, impacts, risks, and opportunities, transition. You know, we've seen it there for a while, but it's now hard in writing in the questionnaire. So there's quite a steep learning curve for a lot of companies, I would think, and a jump. But just from there to assurance, like CSRD requires a lot of assurance. How are CDP looking at that from a scoring and assessing the questionnaire that we submit, relating that back to the level of assurance that's required under CSRD? And I think that's a huge question in the future in terms of scoring for CDP, to make sure that if I submit my CSRD response and I get assurance to a certain level, that there's definitely some, let's try and think that level of assurance by CDP is also the same.
Yeah, definitely an interesting point. Currently, I think we still follow the scoring methodology is not very much tied to assurance as such. Also, because CDP has not ever assumed a role of providing assurance through its scoring. My CDP colleagues can speak more on this, I think. But currently, the CDP questionnaire does have a question on assurance, though, where we have we try to build out that question to also incorporate to push companies to provide evidence of the auditing that they have done on their regulatory reporting. So, for example, ESRS, so CSRD, sorry. So we're building out that part of it, and it's contingent also on the assurance directive, or like that piece of legislation being passed in the coming years. But I would agree that it's a good direction to kind of link, close the loop between CDP's own scoring methodology and assurance. Right now, I think there's just a bit of a vacuum in the assurance space as well. but definitely maybe something that is likely in the future. So yeah.
Okay, super. That's what we might do actually is we'll move on to a table exercise. Really, it's to get all of you guys talking to each other rather than just listening to us. We have a 10-minute break, then we'll start